I want to tell y'all about a hero of mine. You've heard the name before, I'm pretty sure of it. He's called John Bunyan. Now, this is not the Bunyan who had the blue ox bathe. That was Paul Bunyan. John Bunyan was a nonconformist. Let me stop right there for just a minute. Nonconformist is a technical term, but you need to understand the background. A few weeks ago, we talked about the difference between unity and uniformity. And the Church of England was great about requiring uniformity. Someone who was not uniform was a nonconformist. To be a nonconformist didn't mean being an oddball. It meant not attending the services of the Church of England when you lived in England, but instead attending the services of some other Christian sect or group. They were called the Nonconformists because England declared that everyone who lived in England was a member of the Church of England. And some people chose not to go to church there. They chose to go other places, and there were consequences for that. Again, we have the dichotomy between uniformity and unity. So the nonconformist didn't conform to the brand of Christianity endorsed by the crown. What it meant to be a nonconformist in John Bunyan's day was that you were not eligible for any kind of a crown appointment, to any office or any government job. You couldn't be a printer, for instance, of official documents. And oh, by the way, government jobs also included any job in the ministry, especially that of preaching. If you attended church outside of the Church of England, you were sentenced to 6 months in jail if you got caught at it. And if you were a repeat offender, oh my, you could be hanged or exiled to one of the penal colonies. And John Bunyan was a special sort of case. He didn't just attend a nonconformist church, he was a preacher. He was actually a tinker by trade. He fixed pots and pans and buckets and such. But his ministry was preaching. And that ministry, by order of the crown and parliament, was closed to anybody who was not ordained by the Church of England. John Bunyan spent 12 long years in prison for being a preacher. Indeed, he was imprisoned twice for the same offense, that of preaching without a license. And indeed, it was in prison that he wrote one of the greatest works in English literature. It's known today as Pilgrim's Progress. In colonial America, there were 2 books that existed in just about every home in the colonies. The King James Version of the Bible and Pilgrim's Progress. And indeed, it is still one of the greatest pieces of literature in the English language. After Bunyan was finally released from prison the second time, he continued to write and to preach. As a little side note, let me tell you how rough this was on families in that day. His wife and his 4 kids managed to survive his time in prison because while he was there, John was able to make a little money in jail by manufacturing shoelaces. Think about that. The work that went into making shoelaces in jail, and the small amount of money that he could earn from selling them. Throughout his productive lifetime, John Bunyan, in short, paid a heavy price for exercising his faith and his ministry. But that's the definition of a calling. It's what he was called to do. And in his mind, he could do nothing else. He felt that God had presented him with a cross. The cross of preaching the gospel. In a time, frankly, when the gospel was not preached very well. Certainly it wasn't being preached very well by the people who were licensed to preach. In that day, indeed, there were two books that were in circulation among the clergy of the Church of England. They were called the books of the homilies. And preachers who were not well equipped to craft their own sermons read their sermons out of a book. Now, mine are bad enough. Can you imagine what that might be like? John Bunyan felt called by God to take up a cross, a heavy cross, and follow Jesus. Following Jesus into prison, if need be. Well, that takes from a different part of our gospel today. Whoever does not take up his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. That's one of the hardest lessons that Jesus taught. His word to his people was not all roses and rainbows. He spoke frankly about the cost of discipleship, as we discussed last week. In today's gospel, Jesus tells us that following him is the most important thing in the world. More important than family. To set a man against his father, a daughter against her mother. It's more important than children. Whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And indeed more important than life itself. He who loses his life for my sake will find it. These are hard words. It's a hard life. But John Bunyan picked up his cross and he bore it. And it was back in the 1600s. But his imprisonment was not the heaviest part of the cross that he had to bear. The hard part of what he had to bear was his family. Because his wife could not find work. She's the wife of a nonconformist preacher. His children had no refuge. His children, one of whom was blind, were left with no visible means of support. They were cast entirely on the charity of the very people who had very little to be charitable with, because they were nonconformists too. Bunyan could very easily have avoided prison by simply becoming a member of the Church of England. He could have avoided prison by promising never to preach again. He could have avoided all the trouble in the world for himself, for his wife, and for his children. But that's not the nature of a calling. John Bunyan believed that God was calling him to take up a cross. And that meant 15 years of hardship for him and his family. And John Bunyan picked up that cross. And it was one that he could have put down so easily. And his life would have been so much better and so much more comfortable. It would have been easier for him. It would have certainly been easier for his family. Here's the truth of the gospel today. Any of us, at any time, may be facing a difficult task as a part of what God's calling on us is. Any one of us may be called into a place in life that will require us to put ourselves, our families, our children, even our lives in second place. I did second place behind Jesus. The gospel requires you and I to take up our cross every day and make Jesus first in our lives. You and I are called to be prepared to make Jesus the Lord of our lives, not just to pay lip service, but to live out that as a calling. Even to the extent that nothing, not ourselves, not our families, not our children, not even life itself, will take the place of Jesus as the Lord and Master of us. That's the tough lesson of the gospel. And we don't talk about it very much. It's not comfortable to talk about. But that is the tough choice that you and I are called to make. The good news of this gospel is that that is the only choice that gives our lives real and eternal meaning. Making that choice, choosing to live a life that put Jesus first, gives strength to our words and it gives life to our actions. Over the centuries, there have been countless Christians picking up their cross and bearing it, who have made this world a fit place to live in. By our devotion to Jesus Christ, Christian people through the ages, bearing crosses, have given meaning to their own lives, and they have given us this world in which we live. John Bunyan became an icon that stood against all of the church's abuses, the church of the old Church of England. It was a dark time in our history, it really was. But because John Bunyan had his willingness to take up his cross and to make the sacrifice of himself and his family, because John Bunyan was a faithful preacher, his Nonconformist group, we call them the Pilgrims, survived to come to America. They fled the Church of England so that they could practice the religion that they were called to. Did you know that's who the Pilgrims were? Did you know that's who John Bunyan was? Because of John Bunyan and his sacrifice, we have, and I don't think I'm being too forceful here, but because of John Bunyan, because of the Pilgrims, indeed because of the Quakers, we have what we call the First Amendment to our Constitution. Freedom of speech, the freedom of assembly, the freedom of religion. Because John Bunyan picked up his cross unswervingly and followed Jesus, Americans, and indeed many people throughout the world, have religious freedom and at least some degree of freedom of speech. John Bunyan is my hero, and you may be able to tell that. And because he followed Jesus with all his heart, with all his soul, he paid a horrible price for it. And I want you to remember this day that we owe him and those like him. We owe them a great debt of gratitude. And I told you this story this morning because we are approaching July 4th, Independence Day. And it's a good day on which to remember those who gave of themselves that you and I may have what we have.
Amen.